am so incredibly excited to finally share Type Jazz with the world. This is something I've been working on for well over a year, and Adam over at Battleaxe, my boss, has actually created the panel for me. You can see it docked in After Effects. It functions exactly how I wanted it to, so thank you, Adam, for making my vision a reality. We've got a bunch of jazz-themed, colorful buttons down here. Let me walk you through them and show you exactly what they do. With the text layer selected, I'm gonna click the first button, and it's going to immediately apply the Type Jazz effect and rig that allows all of these nice fluid animations to happen. So if I press U, it's gonna give me keyframes for animation in progress, animation out progress. So you can animate both text onto the screen and then again back off of the screen with these two values. This is what's going to drive all of the animation within Type Jazz. Now, if we take a look up in the effects control panel, we're gonna have a Type Jazz effect with nice organized controls. Animation in and animation out. And essentially everything inside these two folders is exactly the same. So everything that I talk about with animation in will apply to animation out. I'm just gonna scoot these keyframes forward in time for the out animation. We'll get to that in a little bit. Let's take a look at the transform controls for animation in. These are the values that will be animated by this animation in progress set of keyframes. They just go from 0 to 100%. And by default, it's going to oscillate on the Y position, but we can very easily modify this if we just come up to any of the properties that we have access to up here. So if I turn my X position up instead of just the Y, now it's gonna move at a diagonal and just as easily oscillate through that movement. I could also get rid of the position animation and turn the scale down to 0, and then it's gonna oscillate through that value as the text is revealed. And the text is being revealed, by the way, under the animation controls through this reveal text checkbox. So if you don't want your text to start invisible, you could just uncheck that checkbox, and now it's going to just oscillate whatever value you've set up here and decay over time. So we've got all of these oscillations just on that scale property moving through it. Now I currently have uniform scale checked on for my transform controls up here, so that means that the X and Y scale are going to be constrained. They're gonna follow each other. But if I uncheck that, then it's only going to oscillate the X scale. Or if I change this to 100% on the X and 0% on the Y, then it's going to oscillate on just that Y scale. And I can change where it's scaling from using the grouping alignment. This is very similar to what we have down in the text animators. I've labeled things in the same way as what we have down in the text animators so that if you're familiar with them, it makes sense, but you don't actually have to go digging into your layer and all the text animators and range selectors to modify things. It's all controlled right up here in the Type Jazz effect. So let's move the grouping alignment to say -100, and then it's gonna put the anchor point at the top of the text instead of the bottom. Or if I put it around -50, that's gonna put it right in the center of the text. So we can just very quickly and instantly get feedback just by modifying these properties and changing them around. Now let's go ahead and put that back down to 0, and what happens if I change my X scale to say 150 and my Y scale to 50? Well, then it's gonna give us kind of this squash and stretch effect going through our text. So just play around with these properties, see what they create, and see what you can do to dial it into what you want. And obviously you can mix and match any of these properties. So I could add in a little bit of position on the Y so it moves up and down as it squashes and stretches. I could add in some rotation, which you'll notice there's X, Y, and Z rotation, which I don't want to throw you off. Those are 3D rotations, but when you're using a 2D text layer, Z rotation equals 2D rotation. I have that noted right here. So if I just increase my Z rotation to 45 degrees, then it will also rotate as it scales and moves. Now I put those 3D properties in here just for simplification and consistency. So the Type Jazz effect will always look the same regardless of what your text layer is actually using. So if you want access to these 3D controls, let's just go back to the beginning and I'll reset the effect, and let's uncheck that reveal text one more time. So we're back to just our standard oscillation. I'm gonna go to the Type Jazz panel with my text layer selected and click on the last button, which is toggle 3D. It enables the per character 3D switch and links up some properties that need linking to the Type Jazz effect. Now I have access to these other 3D controls. So if I wanted to rotate it on the X axis instead of the Z, I could change that to 90 degrees. Let's get rid of the position and let's just play this back and see what it's doing now. As you can see, that text is flapping back and forth essentially. And if I move the grouping alignment up to say -120, then it's gonna act kind of like it's on a hinge swinging down. And we can turn that reveal text back on, and now this is going to work as a way to reveal our text in this 3D way. It's really fun, really cool. And just as easily, we could modify that anchor point. Maybe we put the grouping alignment to -50 and we push the anchor point out a little bit in Z space. And now it's gonna kind of rotate to reveal. Let's change that to -90 degrees so it's coming from above. And if I rotate this to a different angle, you'll be able to see a little bit more clearly what's happening. It's actually rotating in 3D space. So you can see just how quickly you're able to play around with these properties and make things move. All right, let's reset our text one more time. Let's get to the end point. I'll hit reset and I'll toggle off that 3D. And we can change the type of animation just as easily as anything else. So right now it's oscillating through our text, but I could change this in the animation controls from the oscillate animation type down to the bounce animation type. And this is going to give us a different type of animation. Now it looks kind of similar, and that's because of the easing values. So down here we have ease high and ease low. These again are labeled the same as what the properties are down in the text animators just for consistency, but these values are set up for an oscillation. They're symmetrical and around 50% is what I found to give pleasing oscillations. But if I change the ease high to 80 and the ease low to -40, I found that those values produce a pleasing bounce animation. So now our text is dropping into place. Let's make that a little bit more extreme, and you see that it's bouncing off of that baseline as it hits the ground. And you can dial in these ease values to whatever you want. So if that's a little too extreme, back them off a little bit and you'll have something that's a little less extreme, but it's completely up to you what you want to set those ease values to create exactly the type of bounce that you want. But there's more to a bounce than just ease values. So what I want to do is actually just change my text to a big row of periods, because this is going to help us visualize exactly what Type Jazz is doing. If I do that and I turn off reveal text, you can now see, just keep your eyes on the first period. The bounce is actually playing through this line of text essentially. So let's look at the other controls we have to shape this animation. Animator width is going to correspond to the width of the entire motion, whether it's a bounce, an oscillation, or linear movement, which we'll take a look at in a minute. So I'm just gonna collapse this animator width down a little bit so we can see the entire motion of that bouncing animation. And then look at the decay frequency and the decay amplitude. We'll start with amplitude. This value is going to control how large the motion is after each subsequent bounce or oscillation. So if I turn this decay amplitude all the way down to 0, you see that the arc of each one of these bounces is exactly the same height. Now I've set this up in 25% increments. So if I jump this up to 25%, then we're going to have a linear decay curve where each subsequent bounce is going to be decreased by an equal amount. And if I bump that up to 50%, then it's going to be a curved decay. So it's going to progressively become less and less intense on that amplitude. And if I go up to 75%, that's an extreme decay curve. So it's just even more pulled down and it's going to decay much quicker. You can even go all the way up to 100% from here and it will just flatten everything out after that first motion. But you can dial this into anywhere between those set values. I just set up those marker points at 25, 50, and 75% so you can quickly jump to those if you want them. Now decay frequency works very similarly. If I turn this all the way down to 0, then each one of my bounces is going to have the same width. They're not going to decay at all, which doesn't really produce accurate looking bounces. Every bounce after the first bounce should take less time, and that's exactly what decay frequency does. As I increase this value, each subsequent bounce is going to take up less and less time. So that's what decay frequency and amplitude is going to allow you to do, and that's what's going to give you much more natural looking bounces and even oscillations. So you can play with those values as much as you need to get the exact animation that you want. And it really is fun to just interactively adjust these things and see it play out right before your eyes. All right, let's get back to our text. So we'll say Type Jazz is here. And look at some of the other animation controls. So we've actually got a count for how many bounces or oscillations. So if I drop this down to 3, then the text is only going to bounce 3 times instead of 5. And you can do any number between 1 and 5. You could even have it just jump up once. And that's what that looks like. And that applies to both the bounce and oscillation animation types. But another thing we can do is change the direction of the animation. So it's going left to right, but I could change it to right to left, and then it's gonna just reverse the animation. We could go from the center of the text layer outwards, and then start in the middle and go out, as well as outwards in. So 4 different options for the directions, gives you a lot of flexibility with how your text animates, and you can play around with the properties and the animation controls to really create something unique. So if I wanted this to start off screen, I could turn reveal text on, push this up far enough so that I can see it's going off the top of my comp, and then I could really turn up the decay amplitude so it doesn't bounce up so high. I'll just crank this up to something in the 90s, and now it's going to start really high off the comp, drop in, and bounce into place. I might even turn the decay frequency up to maybe 80, maybe even a little bit higher, and then turn the animator width down to remove some of the overlap. That's basically what animator width is controlling, is how much overlap there is between characters. And there we've got something that's just a little bit different. All right, let's reset this one more time. I'll go back to the beginning and reset. And I'll point out some of the other features that we have in the panel here. So everything has been animating per character at this point, but these 3 buttons right here allow you to choose to animate based on characters or characters excluding spaces, words, or lines. So if I just click this button with the text layer selected, it's going to switch to animating by words instead of characters. Or if I click this button, it'll switch to animating by lines. And if I make a couple of lines here, you'll see exactly what that looks like. So let's just play this back. 1 line at a time is revealed, and they are all moving on that position animation. So you can very quickly modify how your text is being animated with the Type Jazz panel. Now let's jump over to Illustrator, where I've got this document I'm working on. It's very preliminary at this point, but it's kind of just like this futuristic UI. And I've got a bunch of different stylings of fonts. So I've got this single text layer that has 2 different colors, 2 different sizes. This one has a lot of tracking on that loading text. And then over here, same thing. We've got a bunch of different colors, different weights of the font. I want to get all of this into After Effects and just see how it might animate, even though this design isn't finished. And because After Effects has recently supported per character styling for their API, Overlord is actually able to transfer all of this data now. And if you own Overlord 2, you can update the desktop app right now and have per character styling. Check out battleaxe.co if you don't already have Overlord, but here's how it works if you're not familiar. I'm just gonna select everything. I'm gonna make a new comp from this artboard. So this comp matches what I have in Illustrator. And then with that selected, I'm just going to push my selection over to After Effects, and Overlord is going to recreate that for me right over here in After Effects. And because we now have per character styling, my text looks exactly the same. Multiple colors, multiple font weights, all of the styling that I had in Illustrator is brought over just like that. So why don't we take this loading text animation, I'll just solo that layer and zoom in on it, and I'll click the Type Jazz button. And once it's loaded, I can play this back and we can see our default animation. So I'll just bring up the text here and let's change the animation. I obviously don't want this to feel cartoony, so let's go into the animation controls for the in animation. I don't need it to oscillate this time. I think I'm just gonna make a linear animation, and this is essentially going to go from whatever values we set in the transform controls down to the unaffected state. So basically point A to point B. So I want to get rid of that Y position, and I'm going to implement some X sliding position there. Let's unlink our scale and change the X scale down to say 10%. And let's also turn the opacity all the way down. So this is going to fade, scale, and slide in, and already I can tell that's looking pretty cool. I like the way that looks, but I want to modify the easing. It's currently set to symmetrical ease high and low. Let's just crank the high to 100, and the ease low, we'll put it like -50 and see what that does. So now that text comes in much more dramatically. I like that a lot. Now let's say I want to apply that same animation that I just spent the time to set up to this other block of text that I have over on this side. Well, I can do that very quickly with these 2 buttons right here, which allow me to copy and paste the Type Jazz settings. So with that layer selected, I'll copy it, and then I'll grab my second text layer, and wherever I have my playhead is where it will paste the keyframe. So I'm gonna go to the beginning of the layer and paste. It'll take a couple of seconds, but it's going to transfer everything that we just created for the first text layer to this text layer. And once it's all loaded in, we can play it back and see exactly how it plays out. There we go. That animation is identical. It obviously has a lot more text to reveal, and it's doing it in the same amount of time. So it's happening probably a little bit more quickly than I would want, and it almost looks like it's animating it by line because of just how much text there is in this layer. But I could lower that animator width if I go into the animation controls and just dial that back if I want it to take less time per character, or I could decide, you know what, I'm gonna animate this one by line instead of characters and play that back. And you can see now that comes in. So it's very easy to work on text animations with Type Jazz and transfer it over to other layers. And while you can completely dial in exactly the animation that you're looking for, you don't have to do that every time. I've also built 80 unique Type Jazz presets that are included with Type Jazz that you can use as they are or as a starting point for your own custom animations. So I've set up this comp over here with this text coarse clear. It's supposed to look like a video game. I want to make this text bouncy and playful. So let's go ahead and apply Type Jazz and then go over to our animation presets. I've organized all of these presets so that it's easy to find exactly what you're looking for. Now, if you haven't installed them yet, my favorite way of doing it is to just find a preset, either in the user presets or the presets folder, just select it and then go to this menu here and say reveal in Explorer or reveal in Finder, and that will open up the directory that your presets are stored in. Just copy and paste your Type Jazz presets into that folder and then come back here and say refresh list and they'll show up in After Effects. You won't even have to restart. So Type Jazz presets, here they are, and we have animation in and animation out, and inside there, we have bounce, linear, and oscillate. I said I want to make this text bounce, so let's open up the bounce folder and take a look at what we have. Bounce in from top, that's probably what I'm going to want, so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to make sure that I am at the start of my layer, and I'm going to make sure that I select the Type Jazz effect. That's very important. If you don't select the Type Jazz effect, it's not going to work. So select it and then double click on that preset, and that just instantly modified the animation properties to create that bounce in from top animation. So let's play this back and we can see our text is no longer oscillating like it does by default, it's bouncing in. And it's not doing anything to the animation out state unless I was applying an animation out preset. I don't actually think I need an out animation for this text layer, so I'm just gonna grab those keyframes and scoot them forward for now. But let's just dial this in a little bit. This is a good starting place, but it's not exactly what I want. First of all, I rotated my text, so I wanna compensate for that rotation by implementing a little bit of X position on that X axis. So now it's going to bounce a little bit more aligned with the text. I might even pull this up and over a little bit more, so it's a higher bounce. But it's being revealed nicely. I like that. Let's actually bump that up even a little bit more. So it drops from a little bit higher point now. And then let's take a look at our animation controls. Let's go into that and maybe decrease the animator width. So this is less overlap between characters now, and it's gonna drop in and appear to animate a little bit more fast. I think that looks a little bit better. I like that. Now let's say that I wanted it to loop. So it's revealed at first, but then I just want it to loop that bouncing animation. To do that, I'm gonna convert this to a hold keyframe with Control plus Alt or Command plus Option, and then click on that keyframe. And that means this value will no longer change until there's a second keyframe or another keyframe after this one. So I can essentially copy and paste these two keyframes, and nothing about this property will change until it's reached the next keyframe. But it's still revealing that text. So we need to set a keyframe on reveal text. And if I press U a couple of times, that'll bring it up, and I'll move this back to the start of the layer. So at the beginning, I want reveal to be on, but once we get to here, I want reveal to be off. So I'm gonna check that off, and now the text doesn't disappear before it bounces a second time. And let's say on the second bounce, I don't want it to bounce 5 times, I want it to bounce 3. So I'm gonna click that to add a keyframe and then bring it back to the start of my layer and drop this down to 3 and make sure that aligns right here. And now it's gonna bounce 3 times instead of 5 after it's been revealed. But the decay frequency and amplitude are so high that those 2 subsequent bounces are super, super small. So let's add some keyframes for those as well. Let's add decay frequency and decay amplitude keyframes, and we'll make those hold keyframes. Go to here, and then let's drop the amplitude down to say 50%. The frequency itself might not actually need to change. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. I'm just going to shorten that animation a little bit so it plays through a little bit more quickly. Great, now I can just move these keyframes back, and if I wanna loop this a few times, I'll just do that. And now it's going to reveal the text as it drops in, and then bounce through our text 3 more times. Now let's look at the out animation. I said that this is almost identical to the animation in, but we haven't really looked at it yet. So let's collapse up the animation in and expand animation out. You see, we still have transform and animation controls. They're almost exactly the same. The exceptions are the grouping alignment. You can only have one grouping alignment per text layer. So that is going to follow whatever the animation in is set to. And I made a note of that right here. Grouping alignment follows in animation. And then down near the bottom in the animation controls, instead of reveal text, Next, we have hide text. So this is going to make the text disappear once the animation has played out. So if I turn this on, and we'll change our animation to not be scaling out, but we'll just have it move down, you'll notice that as that text moves down, eventually it's going to disappear. So just like revealing the text, you can have it hide the text on the way out. Why don't we unlink the X and Y scale, turn the Y scale down to 0, and now it's gonna move down and collapse in on itself. And let's back this up a little bit so that it's moving a little bit more straight down. And now we've got our looping text animation that'll play through the bounces at the beginning. It will loop through those custom bounces, and then it will animate off in a linear way before looping again back to the beginning. And if you've created an animation that you really like and you want to reuse, you can save your own animation presets just as easily as I did. Just come into the Type Jazz effect down in your layers, go into whatever properties you've modified. So if it's for an in animation, just expand out the animation and transform controls and make a selection of all those properties. And then go up to animation and say save animation preset. Then you can save it in the same directory as the other presets or your own custom directory, and it'll be immediately available for you. And if it's an out animation, you would do the same thing, just with the out animation controls instead of the in animation controls. And if you're selective like that when you make your presets, you'll be sure not to overwrite the in animation with an out animation preset and vice versa. Now, in addition to all of the UI panel controls, we've also made everything compatible with KBar, which is a third-party tool. It's something you'd have to purchase separately. It's not something I or Battleaxe have made, but it allows you to have custom buttons. I use it all the time. It's extremely useful for just optimizing your workflow in After Effects. And we've put all of the functionality of Type Jazz into KBar buttons, so you can mix and match these buttons. You can combine them if you want. You can only have a few of them on your KBar if that's what you want, but that is also included with your download of Type Jazz, so feel free to mix and match that however you want. But that's it for Type Jazz. I'm really proud of how this tool turned out, and I think it's gonna help a lot of motion designers make dynamic, fluid animations for text so much simpler than it's ever been before. You can buy it right now at jakinmotion.com. There's a link down in the description. Thank you to Adam for all of your help for actually making my vision a reality with Type Jazz. And if you use Type Jazz at all, please tag me at jakinmotion so I can see it and share your work on Instagram. Leave a comment down below letting me know what you think about Type Jazz. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.